Well, I just beat Final Fantasy VII Remake last night, and I was already planning on doing a little video review for the game because the game is so weird and different from what I expected, yet so much fun and so well put together in some ways, but then such a colossal mess in some other ways. And I wanted to discuss that because it seems like a lot of people were just kind of praising and loving the game no matter what. And I wanted to be more critical on it because, I mean, this is Final Fantasy VII. There's a high standard here. The original is one of the best standards when it comes to classic JRPG action. This game does a lot of things right, but it does some things glaringly wrong. And then I beat the game, and it changed my perception of the game even more. So for this video, I will be discussing spoilers, and I apologize for anyone who doesn't want to hear them. I will try to tell you guys when they'll come up, and hopefully you can just click off if you don't want to hear them. But I kind of have to discuss the spoilers because it really changed my opinion of the game that much more. I almost made this video before beating the game, and I was just gonna say like, whatever, I don't care. But I was like, no, I shouldn't do this yet. I should see this game out to the end. And now that I have, I'm ready to review this game. So let's just get right into it. Our story starts back when the PS3 was first coming out. Square Enix decided to recreate Final Fantasy VII's intro sequence just to show off the power of the PS3. Fans started asking, hey, is this real? If it's real, I'll buy a PS3 just for this game. And basically, Square Enix just kept saying, no, it's not real. It's just a tech demo. It's literally just to show off the power of this new console. It's not real. But fans kept asking again and again and again, can we please get a Final Fantasy VII Remake? One day there was a big article about Square Enix coming out and saying, basically straight up, we can't make a Final Fantasy VII Remake on today's consoles. It would just be too large of a game. It would take too much money. There's no way it would be way too long. There's just no way to make it work with if they made like a modernized brand new version of Final Fantasy VII. After a while, they eventually decided, actually we can do it. And so Final Fantasy VII Remake was born into reality. However, there was a catch. There was two main concerns that started coming over everyone's minds. The first one was the game was no longer going to be turn-based combat. It seems like Square Enix has been trying to move away from this for a long time. Ever since Final Fantasy X, they seem like they're just kind of done with it. And the only turn-based games Square Enix has been making are games like Bravely Default and Octopath Traveler, and then of course the traditional Dragon Quest games that still use traditional turn-based combat. And while it's fine that there's just alternatives to Final Fantasy, and Square Enix wants Final Fantasy to be something new and fresh, when it comes to a remake of a classic turn-based game and to say it shouldn't be turn-based anymore, it raises some eyebrows, but I think most people were jumping over that hurdle perfectly fine and accepting it. And eventually they did show gameplay, and it really got everyone back on board. The other big controversy surrounding this game was the episodic nature of its release. Remake was not going to be a remake of Final Fantasy VII. This game should be called Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1, as it's only the first chunk of the game. In fact, some people were wondering, well, there's 3 discs for Final Fantasy VII, so what if they make this disc 1, and then make the next game disc 2, and then the third game disc 3? Well, that wouldn't really work, because if you haven't played the game, you might not realize this, but disc 1 is actually like twice as long as disc 2, and disc 3 is literally only the final boss and all the in-game content. I'm not sure why they couldn't fit the game on 2 discs, but they couldn't for whatever reason, and so disc 3 is basically just what you put in when you go fight the final boss, and if you want to just do all the other stuff you can do at the end of the game. If they made this game all of disc 1 and then made a second game as all of disc 2, that would just be kind of silly. My idea is they're going to split disc 1 into 2 games and then make disc 2 and 3 its own game and make this a trilogy of Final Fantasy VII Remake games. And after a while, it was announced that this game would take place during all of Midgar, which is not the longest section of the game. In fact, it's really only the first third of the game, I would say. Sure, it's an entire third of the game. It's not like it's, a small section of the game, but basically, it seems like the next remake will have a lot of ground to cover. which is a good thing, because this first game, oh boy. Well, how about we jump into the present day? It's in our laps now. We actually have the ability to play this game outright. And let's just address these two controversies surrounding the game. The first thing about the game, it was the combat, and while most people were already on board with it, some of us were wondering if this was basically going to play like Kingdom Hearts, and I don't think anyone had any problems with that. If Cloud was running around, jumping around like Sora does, and swinging his sword with fast precision, I think most people have been fine with that. Kingdom Hearts actually has some pretty good gameplay. The problem with Kingdom Hearts is really just the story. So you take that kind of gameplay and add it to Final Fantasy VII, which has a better story, one that's a lot less complicated, for example, it might end up being a really good game. However, it shouldn't have its own identity. It shouldn't be like Kingdom Hearts. The truth is that the team behind the Dissidia games were tasked to be a part of it, and I don't even remember if they were still working on this finished game, because at one point, Square Enix had to scrap the whole team so that way a new team could come out and make the game. But I think that it was the Dissidia team. Don't quote me on this, guys. Dissidia plays really well, and hey, so does this game. Now that I've played it, they've done a really smart battle system that I really approve of. There's a lot of inspiration from the classic Final Fantasy VII game in here, but transformed and modernized into real-time combat. And I gotta say, it's some of the most refreshing and fun modern time combat in an RPG I've ever experienced. You see, I'm actually one of those guys who loves playing older games, and with that comes loving playing the classic Final Fantasy games, and with that comes an appreciation for turn-based combat. Now, I like games with real-time combat and turn-based combat, but it seems like a lot of people pick one or the other. A lot of people don't really like turn-based combat. The thing is, Final Fantasy VII is one of the better examples of turn-based combat, and, you know, my earliest RPGs were Final Fantasy VI and then later Final Fantasy VII, and I feel like if more people grew up with those games, more people would enjoy these older turn-based games. And honestly, 7 is one of the best places to start if you're trying to get into older turn-based games. Sadly, a lot of people aren't really trying to get into it. But by taking so much inspiration from these classic games, they managed to make a game that is not like other real-time combat games where I have some of a problem with. I don't like stiff-feeling RPGs where you basically just mash attack and you have like shitty controls for dodging or blocking and parrying and stuff like that. You know, I asked my friends, I said, hey, I don't really like Elder Scrolls games. Like, I don't like Skyrim because the physical attacks are so stiff, and like it seems like a few of my friends just flat out said they use ranged attacks. They don't actually play it like it's a first-person like melee-based game, and that was kind of sad for me to hear because that was the whole appeal for me, and I couldn't get into it because the combat was so stiff, and it was basically came down to, which this is something that a lot of other games have problems with, like Fallout and Borderlands, where it doesn't really matter your skill, it matters your numbers, it matters your stats, it matters your levels. And I don't really think that translates to very fun gameplay. And you might be saying, okay, but you like turn-based games where you just press attack, or magic, or item. Yeah, you just press a command. It's literally the same to me. What the difference being is that the stats affect more things. Like the stats, for example, affect your character's ability to dodge attacks, or your character's ability to counterattack and get critical hits. In Final Fantasy VII, there's a materia system, which if you equip certain materia on, it'll change some of their factors. Like, for example, you can change materia to let you have stuff like cover, where if someone on your party has low HP, the character with cover on will automatically jump in front and take the damage for them, which is kind of cool. It's a good way. It's like it lets you add personality to the characters, and the materia itself was a great way to let you customize each character. You see, this goes back even to Final Fantasy VI and other games like Final Fantasy V, and you know, obviously it goes back to every Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy has this thing about it where each character has a job, and in games like Final Fantasy 1, 3, and 5, and Tactics, of course, you can actually assign jobs to these characters. And what a job is literally its class. People who've played Final Fantasy 11 and 14 should definitely know what I'm talking about here. Basically, your class would be like a warrior, a healer, a mage, you know, stuff like that. And in some Final Fantasies, you can change your entire class. Other Final Fantasies, characters are stuck with their specific class, but you can change other factors about them, like what magic they have and stuff like that. Final Fantasy VII was the first one that really played loosey-goosey with these factors. Characters had, for the most part, set HP and MP levels and some set strength levels, but basically at the end of the day, you could micromanage them to have lots of different other abilities. There's not a thief class, but you can give one of your characters steal if you see fit. There's not a knight class, but you can give one of your characters cover. No dragoon class, but you can give one of your characters jump and stuff like that. No red mages, but you can learn like monster moves with certain materia and stuff like that. There's examples upon examples upon examples here of how Final Fantasy VII was very loosey-goosey and it basically let you really customize how you wanted to play the game, and I really appreciated that. In that system, the materia system has made its return since Final Fantasy VII because every Final Fantasy likes to use a different system, and the materia system has finally come back, but this time it's in a real-time combat game, which means a lot of materia are different and have different functions. However, the way they've executed this is amazing. One of the materias are blue. There's blue materia in the game, and the blue materia lets you combine with another materia. Like green, for example, those are the materia like your cure, your fire, your bolt, your quake, your stuff like that. You can combine those materia with blue materia. So in the original game, there's blue materia called all. And if you put like fire with it, it'll make it so you can cast fire on every enemy instead of just one enemy. If you put cure with all, it lets you can heal your whole party instead of just healing one character. So what I like to do usually is I like to have one character who has cure and all connected, make another character who has only cure without all connected. That way, one person can heal my entire party and one person can heal one person who just happens to need it. It's stuff like that which makes the game fun. The game doesn't tell you to do that strategy. You could play the entire game without doing that strategy, but I play the game that way with that strategy. There's certain materia that do different things, like Magnify is similar to all. It makes it when you shoot, like, let's say you have fire connected to Magnify, when you shoot your fire, instead of hitting every enemy at once, it'll bounce off an enemy and will heat seek onto close by enemies. One time there was like 6 or 7 enemies all on screen. It was ridiculous. And all I had was Cloud and Barret. And I used Cloud's Fire Gu, which is like fire level 3, combined with Magnify, and the fire bounced off of multiple enemies and killed all of them in one hit. It was amazing and so satisfying. The game didn't tell me I had to do that. I did that of my own free will. I did that of my own choice. And this is an example of taking inspiration from the classic game and mixing it with these modern style gameplay of real-time combat. But the thing I really love about this game is the fact that you have to control 3 characters at once. You see, they could have done the Kingdom Hearts approach, where you play as one character and you have 2 allies. You see, Mass Effect does this, and a few other games does this. Even Fallout, that you have like one follower, but you play as yourself mostly. In Final Fantasy VII, if you aren't switching to your party members, you are not getting the most out of your team. Now, you can make your teammates use their actions separately without switching to them, but by switching between them, you're able to grind up your action bar. You see, in classic Final Fantasy VII, you have an action bar. When it fills up all the way, you can now attack, use your item, magic, or whatever. And that's basically what lets you... It basically decides whose turn it is. In this new Final Fantasy VII Remake, you don't have a bar, you can just attack as much as you want. But you have a little bar called the ATB bar. When that bar is full, you can now use your big strong attacks, which are like little special moves. But you can also use magic when that bar is full, and items when that bar is full. You can also hotkey a few commands similar to how you can in Kingdom Hearts. So that way, you, instead of having to pause the action, you can just hold down L1, press one of your face buttons, and now you're shooting fire or doing one of your big sword attacks or whatever. Again, this is another inspiration from that action bar from Final Fantasy VII Classic. So by swapping around between character, and filling up those bars for each of them, you basically are playing a game similar to like a 3-on-3 fighting game, similar to Dragon Ball FighterZ or Marvel vs. Capcom, where you're maximizing all of your characters and keeping each other alive and basically, it's so much strategy and thinking involved, while you also have to actually use some skill of your own, like, dodging, blocking, and knowing when to attack. There's a stagger bar where you can do more damage to an enemy once you've staggered them and they've fallen over. There's a lot of mechanics here that makes this game a ton of fun, and any game that requires you to actually think and use strategy is something I'm going to enjoy more than something that just involves mashing and having a weapon with higher stats. So right out of the gate, one of my biggest concerns with this game was handled with so much proper love and care that it really didn't matter that the game was no longer turn-based. The combat is so fun and so satisfying that it kind of makes me sad that this is going to be probably exclusive for Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Final Fantasy XVI might not play like this. Obviously, the materia system needs to be exclusive to Final Fantasy VII. It's even tied into the narrative of the game. So if they make a Final Fantasy XVI, I would love for them to use this 3-character party system where you have to be switching and switching and switching because it's so much fun. But, maybe they could come up with another system involving magic, or maybe something else involving classes or something. Maybe they could take some inspiration from Final Fantasy V this time, but create an all-new narrative that's really fun and exciting in its own right. First controversy, squashed. This game is awesome. However, I have a love-hate relationship with this game, and a big part of that is because of the second controversy. It's because of the episodic nature of this game. Now, hearing that the game is only just Midgar, that's fine. If they just expand on Midgar and make it a really big experience and add a few more layers to the game, I don't care. If it makes 3 games that are all badass, well, that's 3 badass games instead of only 1 badass game. It's not the direction I would have gone in. The direction I would have gone in would literally be remaking the game with modern graphics. You might say that's a waste because we already have the original. Well, the original didn't have voice acting, and the original had little chibi avatar characters. What I mean by that is, whenever Cloud is walking around the map, it doesn't really look like Cloud. It looks like a little cartoon chibi version of Cloud. Basically, it's like if you read a manga and the characters barely look like the actual realistic depictions of the character. I guess imagine like panty and stocking. For the most part, they're just these little chibi weirdo versions of the characters, and then when they transform, they actually look like they're full-on normal human versions, and that's how this game is. Classic Final Fantasy VII, you only see what the characters really look like in battle sequences and in cutscenes. Well, it's fine for the most part. It just, a lot of these cutscenes in the original Final Fantasy VII are conveyed with these little chibi characters, and it kind of makes you have to think for yourself in your mind what these characters actually look like when they're doing these things. Sometimes in the cutscenes, characters are doing these weird cartoon Looney Tunes-esque actions that are almost impossible to translate into real life, which means a lot of these cutscenes need to be reinterpreted completely in order to make this work. So, in my opinion, the game literally just needs to be remade. But they're going with this episodic idea and approach. So, how well is this executed? Well, the game isn't super short. In the original Final Fantasy VII, to beat Midgar, it'll probably only take you about a few hours. In this game, it doesn't take only a few hours to beat the game. It takes about 30 hours. Why? Filler and padding. Now, in some games and shows and movies or whatever, there's filler scenes. A famous filler scene would be the moment in Dragon Ball Z where Goku and Piccolo learn to drive cars. No one complains about this. And here's what I have to say about Final Fantasy VII's remake and its filler scenes. I have a lot to complain about. Half the time the filler is completely inappropriate, and the other half the time the filler is so boring. There's so much padding with combat and combat and combat. It's like, think of every stage like a dungeon. It's like there'll be a dungeon, and then another dungeon, and then another dungeon, and then you can finally fight, do the main objective that was from the original game. But all of these little sections with levels have their own boss fights and everything. And boss fights in Final Fantasy VII Remake are very satisfying, but they're also very long. Now you have to make the boss fights long-winded in order for them to feel satisfying, but the boss fights take longer in this real-time combat game than they do in the game where you just read text and press attack over and over and over. You see, games need pacing. If you just have a marathon of action, you're going to get burnt out and you're going to want to take a break. In a lot of games, like Final Fantasy for example, it'll be big main story objective, wandering around the world map, going to a village, buying items and talking to people, watching lots of story and dialogue moments, and basically sitting back, relaxing, and just absorbing the story. And then, by that point, you're ready to hit another dungeon and then go fight another boss. Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't take this approach. Final Fantasy VII Remake says, well, in the original game, the characters did this, but we need to stretch this out as long as possible. So here's an example. Very early on, when you go to blow up the second reactor, which is reactor 5 really. In the original game, there's a sequence where you run around in like train tracks until you get to the reactor. Then you do the reactor, and then you fight a boss, and then, shenanigans happen. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, however, you have to fight a bunch of these new spirit enemies, which I'll get to. Then you have to fight in the train tracks, just like you did in the original game. Cool. Then you have to fight in this big weird facility that takes forever, and there's actually puzzles you have to solve. Then you get to go to the reactor, but this time you have to do a bunch more fighting before you get to the boss. It's ridiculous because there's like 2 bosses you have to fight, a major puzzle moment, and then a boss, and it's just this marathon of combat, and it gets draining. Instead of going to a town and resting your brain and absorbing the story and buying new weapons, you have to just turn the game off. Some of these filler sequences aren't bad. There's a famous one that people are really happy about that basically fleshes out more for the character of Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. Now, I have my own problems with this sequence, and I think I'm just going to save that for when I'm talking about the story, which I'll do a little bit later on, because I will eventually lead into the spoiler section. But a lot of people like this section with Jesse, and for the most part I did, besides the things that really get on my nerves. A bad example of this, however, was the train ghost yard sequence, where we had an urgent issue that we needed to address really quickly and right away, but then we discovered ghosts were real and decided to go on this really inappropriate adventure while our friends are possibly, well, again, very urgent issue. Our friends are possibly going to die. I don't understand this game. And a lot of the times when you're in the towns, you have to do side quests. Now, here's the thing about side quests. You can say, okay, well, side quests are optional. No one's forcing you to play the side quests. However, by doing the side quests, you can get items that you can't get throughout the game any other way. You also gain experience points, and because there's no random battle encounters like the original game, you kind of need these experience points in order to level up. Skipping the side quests in Final Fantasy VII Remake will just hurt you tremendously, so you basically really need to do these side quests, or else you're just kind of ruining the experience for yourself. Problem is, side quests aren't fun in this game. A lot of them are just fetch quests, where you talk to one guy, walk somewhere, talk to another. The majority of these, however, are where you talk to one guy, go off to the wilderness, and fight some enemies. Cool. That at least is a little bit more fun, but even that after a while becomes very taxing. And remember, most of the game you're spending is just destroying enemies like a one-man army, and then going out and fighting more enemies for your side quests. That's your downtime? Fighting more enemies? To me, the pacing just makes no sense. The side quests are very boring, and if you're going to force me to sit through all this filler, at least make it enjoyable and good. For example, the original Final Fantasy VII, and even Final Fantasy VI, and most games in general, all have filler in it. You just might not consider it that way. For example, filler in Final Fantasy VII would be the famous cross-dressing scene. There's no reason why they had to put all that in the game. You could have just gone straight to the Don's office and saved Tifa that way. You shouldn't have to have dressed up like a girl, but they put that in the game because it's fun and it's funny. It's taking itself lightly and having a good time with it. There's lots of segments like that. Segments that are barely even connected to the main plot, but you do them anyway, and they're fun. They could have been handled a different way, but they went with doing it a fun way. And so basically, yeah, first right off the bat, the episodic nature of this game really hurts it in so many ways. It's really hard to recommend this game as a replacement of the original Final Fantasy VII. I could say, well, if you don't know much about Final Fantasy and you want to get into it, 7's a great place to start. And look, there's a shiny new modernized version of the game that doesn't even use turn-based combat. It's hard for me to say, if you play this, you'll understand the original game, because it's so full of pacing issues and really bad story segments that were never even in the original game. But it's not all bad. There's a few things they did here and there that I think was a good call. For example, Cloud has a lot of visions of Sephiroth throughout the game. While I think it's kind of annoying that there seems to be this obsession with forcing the rivalry between Cloud and Sephiroth so ham-fistedly, it makes a lot of sense. In the original game, there's text that speaks to Cloud. It's sort of like his inner voice. It tells him things. Sometimes it tells him contradictory things and tells him to do the wrong things, tells him to do bad things. Sometimes when you play this game, maybe your first time, you might think, oh, it's like Cloud talking to himself. It's like his inner thoughts. And you read it in Cloud's voice. However, later on in the game, you notice it's a little bit more sinister, and you might start to read it in Sephiroth's voice or Genova's voice if you know the story of the game and know what's going on with Cloud and his inner voice. It uses the medium to its advantage. This game uses text to show dialogue. There's no voice acting. So by just having an anonymous voice with no name for the voice at all, you, the reader, has to decide what the hell's going on, and you're just as lost as Cloud. And so instead of doing this inner voice, they have visions of Sephiroth talking to Cloud directly. This was a good call, and a lot of people who don't know much about Sephiroth, for them it's setting up what this dynamic is and why Cloud and Sephiroth have a rivalry together. It's also dropping little hints here and there about what happened in Cloud's past to make him hate Sephiroth so much, which is also fine because Cloud tells the story of what happened in the past right after Midgar, which makes me think Chapter 2 is going to start with a flashback sequence to what happened back in the past, which, hey, that's a great way to start the game. Another example is a tournament dojo area in the slums wall market. You see, in the original game, there's a tournament area at Gold Saucer, but Gold Saucer happens after you leave Midgar. So instead of having no special side tournament fun stuff, you can still access the tournament dojo area, but now it's in wall market. This is not a bad idea. The best thing they did, however, in my opinion, was adding more fights with the Turks. You see, in the original game, I don't even think you fight Reno until much later on, way after Midgar. Maybe you fight him once before, but basically they added in more boss fights with Reno and Rude, and after you fight both of them separately, you get to fight both of them at the same time for a real big challenge. Now you see, this works fantastically because it's a difficult boss fight towards the end of the game that tests your skills, which you need in a game's climax. The original Final Fantasy VII would have no reason to have such a difficult boss fight that early on, but because this game's stretched out, this makes a lot of sense. It also lets you get more familiar with the Turks and sets up your rivalry with them, which will lend itself well for the next game. In the next game, if you still fight the Turks at the same spots you fight them in the original game, it's fine because the game will have a different pace. You see, the climax of this game has to come at a different point of the actual story at large because this is a episodic game, and these episodes still need to feel like full complete games. They can't just feel like a part of a game, because really it shouldn't be seen as episodic. It should be seen as like sequels to the Remake series. So again, some of these new additions are actually really good and help the game feel like a more complete game. Problem is, all those negatives I said still exist. So first controversy, fine. The battle system, the combat is really, really good. It's some of the best Final Fantasy has ever done if we're talking about real-time combat. Second controversy, the episodic nature of the game hurts the game so badly. It holds it back in ways that really it shouldn't have. This game is nowhere near a masterpiece at the same level that the classic game is. But is that necessarily a deal breaker? No. If you're a fan of Final Fantasy at all, you should play this game. If you like Kingdom Hearts, you'll probably enjoy this game too. If you just want to get into Final Fantasy and you think the cutscenes look cool and this game is kind of selling you just on its own appeal, because you think it just looks like a good game, you'll probably enjoy it. It's pretty enjoyable thanks to the combat alone, and because the original story beats still hold up. And seeing them portrayed with these modern characters and with voice acting, it can actually get really emotional because the original game was really emotional. And luckily, the voice acting for characters like Cloud, Barret, and Tifa are handled so damn well. However, there's a third controversy because it's Square Enix, and they decided that this game needs to be controversial in its own right. This game makes huge changes to the original game, but, you know, it's kind of weird. This game's so different that it doesn't feel like they're retconning the original game, because a retcon is when you retell something in a way that would still kind of make sense for back then. And this game is basically just doing its own thing. Now, for the most part, it's actually really accurate to the original game, but there's a few things here and there that are so wildly different. There's really no excuse for it. And this is where I'm going to be talking about the story, and this will be light spoilers. If you don't mind me talking about the introduction of the game and the earlier parts, then you need not worry. But basically, this game really shouldn't even be called Final Fantasy VII Remake. It should be called Final Fantasy VII B-Side, or Final Fantasy VII Alternate Tale, or Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or something like that. It's not really a remake, but it is at the same time. However, I fear this series might be going in a weird direction, and I'll get to why right here and right now. First thing you notice that's a major change are these ghostly spirits that surround Aerith. When that happens, Cloud is now able to see them when he used to not be able to see them. These spirits will interact with the characters in weird ways. It basically prevents them from going some places and pushes them into going to other places. Pretty early on, I basically called them the plot spirits because they push the plot forward or make sure the plot is on the right track. I felt right away this was a very lazy way of telling a story. It was super annoying, and every time they came on screen, I groaned and groaned because the original game never had them. Really, no game needs them. All you have to do is just give the characters proper motivation and proper reason to go where they need to go. There's no reason to make spirits push characters in the right direction or the wrong direction. The second major change that bugged me was that for some reason Avalanche is a huge military. Yeah, it makes no sense. In the original game, it's mostly implied that Avalanche is just Barret, Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie, and Tifa. Basically a small handful of freedom fighters who give a damn about what the government is doing with planet Earth's energy. For some reason, there's higher-ups above Barret now, and there's this huge army of soldiers. At one point, they all just run in and basically save the day. It feels like Call of Duty or something, and it doesn't make any sense. The justification for why Barret's team bombs reactors and why the rest don't is because they consider Barret and his section of Avalanche to be some sort of extremist group. However, when you see the rest of Avalanche, they're all just generic soldiers who look almost exactly like Shinra soldiers. They all have big machine guns and they ride in like a big truck to get to the destination. It makes no sense at all. And later on, it's explained that the mayor of Midgar is an inside man working with Avalanche? How big is this army fighting against Shinra? It's like a full-on civil war. In the original game, it was implied that Shinra had total control of everyone and no one was fighting back. I mean, it just kind of makes no sense. But the absolute worst part of this game has to be the ending. It's the reason why this game is so disappointing and so frustrating for me. This game was amazing up to this point where I was just so upset, I turned the game off. I couldn't even believe they've done this. And, well, let's get into some spoilers here. Again, massive spoiler warnings. Do not watch this part if you do not want this spoiled. If you want to see the game for yourself and you're not, you're not turned off by this ending, fine. Because in my opinion, this game's great and it's still worth playing. It's a great game in a lot of ways. It just has some glaring issues. For me, I can play games that have issues and enjoy them. This one hurts a little bit more because it's based on a game that defined my childhood in a lot of ways. I mean, Final Fantasy VI and VII are two of my favorite games of all time. So, let's just get into this. During the end of the game, you do the motorcycle chase sequence that happens after you're leaving the Shinra building, just like the original game. However, Instead of stopping when the road ends, you stop when you drive into Sephiroth. Now, here's the thing. Sephiroth seems to be controlling these spirit things. And it's been said by Red 13 that these spirits aren't just any other spirits. They're not like the souls of the dead or anything like that. These spirits aren't even being controlled by Sephiroth. They just happen to be working with him along the way. At one point in the game, Sephiroth kills President Shinra. Now he does this in the original game, so no big deal. And the way they presented it was different, but it looked really cool. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is, he then stabs Barret right through his chest. I don't know how Barret is supposed to survive this, so I was actually kind of upset. But I was thinking, there has to be some sort of twist here. There's no way Barret's dead. That would just be ridiculous. I mean, why would they kill off Barret unless they just don't want to program his character into the next game? But why would they do that? Barret's such a unique character by having a gun on his hand. There's so many abilities that only he would be able to use. And not to mention, he'd probably be one of few range-based characters in the game. So again, getting rid of him is just killing your own game's variety. However, after a boss fight with a Genova monster, your first encounter with a Genova monster, which is a great way to end the game by the way, Barret wakes up. Turns out one of the spirits made sure he didn't die. Barret doesn't even feel that much pain. He doesn't have a scar or a stab wound, he's not bleeding or anything like that. He feels just fine. What Red 13 says about these spirits is that they're actually called whispers, and they're the will of destiny. What does that even mean? Well, it means that these characters are on a path of predetermined fate. Whenever they try to counter destiny, destiny pushes them in the right direction. So that way they have to fulfill the same events from the first game. This is why I complained about the spirits pushing these characters towards the plot. It seemed like a lazy way of writing, but it actually turns out these are part of the bigger picture, and we just didn't know why yet. Now, to be fair, I was interested in knowing why these characters worked the way they did, and it seemed plausible that Sephiroth was controlling them. However, that wasn't the case either. What's frustrating about these whispers is that during the new segments, during, like, for example, the mission where you have to do stuff with Jessie and it fleshes out her character, these whispers are nowhere to be seen. Meaning, did this happen in the original game? Like, this happened in the original story, we just didn't play it? I don't understand. Is this an actual retcon, or is this game trying to be its own thing? It's confusing. In fact, during that mission, you have to fight a soldier first class, similar to what Cloud used to be. To me, it makes it feel like this whole idea of fighting against destiny is kind of half-baked. It doesn't really make much sense for this game in particular. But I have no problem with this game doing its own thing and being slightly different from the original, as long as it for the most part tells the same original story in a good and fun, exciting way. And this game managed to do that pretty good. It could have been better, but it did a pretty damn good job. I was ready to recommend this game, and I thought the ending was so perfect, so badass. It really showed how badass these characters were in doing these awesome original moments. It's basically the privilege of being on a PS4 when the previous game was on a PS1. But then the dreaded ending happens where Sephiroth is there by all of these spirits. He cuts a portal into them and walks inside. Aerith walks up to the portal and turns it white. She then says, "This is a dimensional gate. By walking into it, these characters will be changing their own destinies," meaning that the predetermined fate from the original game will no longer apply. This really just made me want to throw up the second this happened, and I know that this is kind of like me being an entitled gamer and being, upset and complaining that the game isn't following its original story, but this is pretty ridiculous and stupid. I mean, Final Fantasy VII already juggles so many themes and so many different ideas. It's a cyberpunk dystopian future world that's trying to tell a story about war, politics, religion, nature versus technology, heroism, individualism, and love. And now we're in this game where we're talking about fighting your own destiny. I don't mind this. it kind of actually works and makes sense for a character like Cloud, but does it really work for characters like Barret, Tifa, Aerith, and Red 13? Not really. All these characters have their own original stories, but now this game is being flung into this weird direction that's giving me some major Kingdom Hearts vibes. Well, I won't spoil everything, but you know, it's safe to say that early on in this game, there's no fight with Sephiroth, and I thought maybe it would be cool if the game did end with a fight with Sephiroth in some way. Well, they managed to pull this off, and you do have to fight the man himself, but after you defeat him, there's weird ramifications. Now you're in a new dimension. You're no longer in the predetermined fate of Final Fantasy VII Original. Now, basically, the sequel to this game could be anything. We don't even know if it's going to follow the original game. What I'm hoping they do is they keep it pretty similar to the original game, but the first game was just, you know, about its own original adventure and blah blah blah. This game is now a time travel story about an alternate dimension. And then something crazy happens. You see, I don't mind this game doing its own thing. It could have done its own thing without doing all this in-your-face bullshit, where they break the fourth wall and decide to make a bunch of meta commentary about Final Fantasy VII. It didn't have to do this, but it did, which is really annoying. But you know, I guess I could be fine with that. But what they do with it is the most disgusting part. You see, what happens is everyone from Sector 7 comes back to life, and everyone starts rebuilding Sector 7. You see, in Final Fantasy VII, Sector 7 is destroyed by Shinra, and characters like Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie all die. But you see Biggs waking up in a hospital bed, implying that characters who have died are alive again. Worst of all is there's a vision of Zack. Now, Zack is a character that you don't know until later on in the game. You see, Aerith is reminded of Zack when she meets Cloud. Zack was also a soldier first class who wore purple and carried a big sword. But what she doesn't know is that Cloud actually used to work with Zack. They were part of the same team. The difference is that Cloud wasn't a soldier first class. Zack was. Zack was the guy in the purple clothes who had the big sword. There's a whole prequel game all about Zack that really retcons a bunch of stuff, and it's kind of really horrible in the story department, but at least it's good in the gameplay department, where you play as Zack, and it's about the story, and you even have to replay through the events that happened back in the past where Sephiroth destroys Cloud's hometown, and Cloud has to save everyone by fighting Sephiroth. But the real story is that Cloud is a grunt soldier. He's not a real soldier first class. He's not as badass as he portrays himself to be. However, Hojo experiments on Cloud after the fact, trying to fuck with his mind, and Cloud does get infused with Mako energy and becomes about as strong as a soldier anyway. And then Cloud seems to think he is Zack. Cloud dons the purple suit. He wears the same armor that Zack wore, and he carries the same exact Buster Sword that he actually got from Zack. Zack, however, was executed by Shinra because he knew the truth. The game shows a cutscene of Zack after he's been shot down by Shinra, and after you defeat Sephiroth by defying destiny, gold sparkles fall down and bring Zack back to life. Now, Zack died several years ago. In fact, I'm pretty sure he died 5 years ago before the game starts. None of the Shinra soldiers that died come back to life. Only Zack. This is confusing as hell. Why did Zack come back to life randomly from the past? If Zack survived that fight, then why is Cloud the way he is? Why did Cloud decide to adopt Zack's identity and try to be like Zack if Zack is still alive? In fact, it even showed Zack walking and carrying Cloud on his shoulder because Zack was trying to protect Cloud during that whole time. Aerith even has a vision of Zack during this time, and it makes literally no sense. So Zack is alive out there? Why did Zack come back? Of all the people, if changing destiny meant that random people throughout time were going to be alive or dead, I don't understand. It didn't show other people not alive or not dead besides Biggs besides Biggs. But the difference is that Biggs just died recently. He was in a hospital bed and he just happened to wake up. I think it was Destiny that was trying to keep him dead, and after Destiny was defeated, he just woke up. And that's not that big of a deal considering what just happened. But it doesn't even make sense when Zack is back alive too. Will Zack be a playable party member in the next game? Why? Zack would fight identically to Cloud because Cloud's fighting style is based off of Zack. They literally fight with the same sword. So, why? How? It doesn't make any sense. Again, it reminds me of Kingdom Hearts. In Kingdom Hearts, you have Sora, Donald, and Goofy the whole time. But Sora doesn't really care about Donald and Goofy, he cares about Riku. But it also kind of reminds me of Roxas from Kingdom Hearts, because Roxas fights identically to Sora. So, it's kind of weird. Why are we going to now focus on the relationship of Zack and Cloud? You know what they could have done is they could have just let you play as Zack during a flashback sequence. I mean, in the original game, there was a flashback sequence of Cloud and Sephiroth fighting together, and you actually got to control Sephiroth in your party. He was leveled like 99, had all the best magic in the game, and the enemy you fight, he kills in one hit. So, I don't see why they couldn't have put that in the game. I mean, imagine a sequence where you get to do this whole story mission. You know, this would be like one of the filler parts of the game that would actually be a lot of fun, where they would stretch the game out by letting you play as Zack, Cloud, and Sephiroth as a three-man team. With Zack would fight how Cloud fights identically. He would basically be like the Cloud of that section, and he would be your team leader. And Cloud would be just a grunt soldier who fights differently with a gun. Maybe similar to how Barrett fights or something, but he would just basically have a rifle and stay back and only be able to use like certain materia, and he'd be really, really weak and he'd die easily. That seems fine if they make it to where you also have Sephiroth, where if Cloud dies easily over and over and over, Sephiroth is just super OP, and have Zack be somewhere in the middle. Have Zack be someone who's kind of reasonable to be fighting these characters at this level, while Sephiroth can just kill everything in one fucking hit and have these super broken OP moves. That would be a really fun way to tell a story about the past with an interactive flashback with lots of battles. That would be a good way to utilize the whole process of a remake. You see, if you're going to attempt a medium, you need to take full advantage of what you have. So, for example, in the original game, they took full advantage of the fact that there was no voice acting by having Cloud's inner monologue be a part of the game. You don't know how to read that voice because you don't know who's even talking to you. At first you think it's Cloud's thoughts, but then you realize Cloud's thoughts are clouded by people trying to control him. So, again, if you're going to make a more action-focused remake, having a flashback sequence where you get to actually play as Zack would be very fun. But bringing Zack back to life, I just kind of explained why it's completely pointless, because you can just make a way to play as Zack in this game. But this has insane implications. For one, if you can fight the concept of destiny, does that mean that there's physical versions, physical embodiments of other concepts? Like, for example, can you fight the concept of death? If you kill death, does it make it so you just don't die? Can you fight the concept of time and space itself? And when you defeat the concept of time and space, you can time travel? I mean, what are the implications here? Why can you see Destiny and interact with Destiny? Can you not interact with other concepts? It just is confusing. It's like for some reason Cloud and Aerith can see the fourth wall. I don't understand why they would put this in the game. It's so confusing and it doesn't even add up in a logical way. Now maybe in the next game they'll do something with it that's really cool, but as of right now, well, they showed certain sequences from the original game. People were having visions of different things that happened in the original game, and Red 13 says, if we fail in defeating Destiny, this will be our future. Now this is really confusing again, because in Final Fantasy VII, the original game, you win! You defeat Sephiroth and save the world, and the world is fine. So what the fuck is the problem? Why is that not the right Destiny? In fact, Aerith asked if we wanted to go through the portal or not, and I didn't want to go through it. I said no, I would rather just let the game play out the way it's supposed to go. Of course, I have the advantage that I know what's supposed to happen, and these characters in the game don't know that. It's weird though because it broke the fourth wall and asked me directly if I wanted to go through because it's talking about the game's destiny. I don't consent to this. I don't want the remakes to be that wildly different. And why do I not want it to be that different? Well, there's certain things that need to still happen the same way. Sure, you can change a few things here and there, but fans were demanding cross-dressing as Cloud in this game. They were willing and ready to outrage if Cloud didn't cross-dress just like he did in the PS1 game. But they put it in the game because they knew it would satisfy the fans. They put in the motorcycle sequence because they knew it would satisfy the fans. They put in all the stuff from the original game because they knew fans would be happy to see it. But they changed a few things here and there, and for the most part, it's fine. They didn't change anything too majorly that would upset people. But these implications are very strange. If Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse aren't going to die, and Zack's not going to be dead, then what's not to say Cloud could just revive Aerith if she dies? Now you start to see the problem. Is Aerith not going to die? Ironically, one of the most iconic things about Final Fantasy VII, and one of the most iconic moments in Final Fantasy in general, is the death of Aerith. And without that, is this even Final Fantasy VII anymore? You see, this game was really fun. I haven't played a game that was this political in a long time. You see, most games nowadays, yeah, they interject politics, but it's usually about identity politics. And doesn't even comment on the fact that, well, if you play Uncharted or Tomb Raider, yeah, Nathan Drake and Lara Croft are these humans with feelings and blah blah blah, but they're also these bloodthirsty killing machines that have killed people in the thousands. It doesn't commentate on real-world violence or war, and when it does, it's usually half-baked, and basically, you have to find indie games and other lesser titles that show you hard-hitting, real thought-provoking stories. So it was really nice to have a game that was so forward with its political ideas. And I loved it. I loved Barrett basically fighting for the poor and fighting for revolution and standing up against the government. It was awesome. Having politics in games can be really satisfying because, you know, sci-fi stories and short stories and movies are all about politics. They're all telling you a message about that stuff, and it's been a while since I've played a game that had it. I was having a blast with this game. But without Aerith dying in the future, without these major moments from Final Fantasy VII, is it even Final Fantasy VII if the story it has to tell is a completely different story, but just happens to use these same characters? Is this what people want when they said they wanted a remake? I don't think so, because that's not a remake. Like I said, it's more like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or Final Fantasy VII, I don't know, alternative story, or whatever. This isn't Final Fantasy VII. This is something else. Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core is called Crisis Core because it's a different game. Final Fantasy VII Advent Children is called Advent Children because it's a sequel based after, you know, the events of the game. But Final Fantasy VII Remake is claiming to be a remake. And remake is not an appropriate title because this game is not a remake. I mean, this one is, but maybe the second game won't be called Remake. I mean, Square Enix likes to make weird names like Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance. Maybe Final Fantasy VII Remake Chapter 2 will be called Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or something weird like that, and the number 2 won't be a part of it. I don't know. It's very confusing. I feel like I've been sold something that I didn't sign up for, and I'm very confused. So many fans wanted a remake, and instead of getting a remake, we got something weird and different, and Chapter 2 might be even more weird. I don't really even know what to compare it to. I've been comparing this in my head to things like Star Wars and Neon Genesis Evangelion. You see, in Evangelion, there's a show, and that's what it's based on, and it's really good. But then they made these movies called the Rebuild movies. The first movie is basically the first 4 or 5 episodes condensed into one story, and it's pretty accurate to the original. It has visual upgrades, and it looks really good, and yeah, you might as well just watch that. You don't need to watch the show if you can just watch these movies. However, Rebuild 2 starts off very radically differently. It introduces new characters and changes things up all over the place. characters who are going down certain character arcs go in opposite directions, and characters act in very opposite ways. Characters don't act like their previous characters. The ending is different. A lot of things are different. And then you get to Rebuild 3. Rebuild 3 is not even the same. It doesn't even try to follow the same story as the original show. It does its own completely unique thing. The aesthetics, the visuals, and everything about it, the environment even, the conflict, the war that's going on. It's no longer about man versus, whatever else is out there, whether it be our creator or what. It's now about man versus man in a war. It's weird. It doesn't make any sense. And here's Final Fantasy VII Remake. The first remake is very accurate to the beginning of the game. And now it's saying that the next remake might be radically different. I mean, characters who are dead are going to be alive, and we don't know what's going to happen. That's kind of upsetting, because literally all I wanted was to see the original story and better graphics, because a lot of these scenes would have forced to have been reinterpreted no matter what. No matter what, just seeing the characters where they actually look like the characters and don't look like little chibi avatars would have changed your perception of the game. It would have been a brand new experience. And adding a new combat system to it, well, it's not necessary, but because the system was so much fun, sure, it was a fine addition, and it would have really changed the game and made it into something really unique and fun. What they have here, if they would have just made the game the way they basically made it, but then just didn't add in that part at the end, this would have been a very satisfying game. It would have been a really good remake of Final Fantasy VII, at least the first part of it. But now, I'm confused. I don't know if this remake trilogy is going to follow the story of Final Fantasy VII that well. I guess it's kind of cool to not know if certain characters will live or die or not, or if the events will be different, but the idea that characters who died in the past will be alive again, and the concept of destiny and time and death mean nothing. It just means that, well, it just means that nothing matters anymore. There's no consequences for anything anymore. You see, if you're going to involve time travel or interdimensional travel in your stories, you need to use them in ways that feature themselves in the conclusion. You see, for example, again, if Aerith dies, what's to stop Cloud from just changing destiny and bringing her back? After all, when she dies, he gets really sad, and he would probably want to do anything to bring her back. Even if he knows it's a bad idea, he would still attempt and try to bring her back. Even if it has huge ramifications, maybe something else happens, like Tifa dies or something crazy. I don't know, but what if Cloud does that? I mean, after all, when Aerith dies, she becomes the one with the life stream. She's the one who stops Meteor and saves the world after she's already dead. So if Cloud doesn't let her die, I mean, that would have huge ramifications for the game's ending. But if he does let her die because that's what needs to happen, then why wouldn't he go back and save her? If she's dead and Cloud doesn't go back and save her, that's going to make no sense with this game's pre-established story now. If interdimensional travel and time travel doesn't come up again for the rest of the remake series, then it makes no sense, and this game's story is falling apart. You need to have that come back up in a way that's meaningful. I don't know how they're going to do this and pull this off, but it's very confusing and unnecessary. I don't know why they couldn't have just remade the game. And basically, I'm much less excited for these games now. However, well, if they still follow the similar story beats of the original games, and the combat is still a lot of fun, I'll probably still pick up the sequel. Honestly, it's going to depend on how they advertise this game. If it's straight up going to be something completely different, I don't think I'll get it. I don't think I'm going to care. I like the original game. I don't really care about Square Enix's new adventures. I didn't really like Final Fantasy 15 that much. I know a lot of people did, but I think they were basically settling because they haven't had a good Final Fantasy game since, I don't know, maybe 12? I didn't even play 12. The last Final Fantasy game I played that I enjoyed was 10. So, yeah, 15 was good compared to 13, but it wasn't that good. I didn't even finish it because it was so boring. It was one of the worst games when it comes to real-time combat. And for the most part, you're just driving around in circles like it's Grand Theft Auto with like no missions. Kingdom Hearts 3 was also a huge disappointment. It was good. It wasn't a bad game, but it was only slightly above mediocre. It had one of the worst systems in combat of any Kingdom Hearts game. I mean, honestly, in my opinion, I'd rather play Chain of Memories. I'd rather play Dream Drop Distance. I think it's only better than like Birth by Sleep. And a lot of people think Birth by Sleep is one of the best ones. And they probably don't agree that Kingdom Hearts 3 is better than it. Kingdom Hearts 3 is a game where you just button mash to win, and the story is so stupid and lazy. It's like they didn't even try with Kingdom Hearts 3. So I'm not really particularly excited for Square Enix's adventures. 7 Remake gives me some hope for Final Fantasy 16 if the combat can be as good as that. But for the most part, I'm not really there. You see, Final Fantasy games are very different from what they used to be, because Square Enix is very different from what they used to be. After Squaresoft and Enix merged into Square Enix, it affected the properties of both companies dramatically. Big reason why is because a lot of members of the original Squaresoft team had left, and different people had took up the mantle of filling the roles. Now, Nomura took up a much bigger role, and his Kingdom Hearts series was very successful. But he's been really in charge, and he has a lot of power when it comes to Final Fantasy VII spin-offs. And for the most part, these spin-offs have basically ruined everything good about the original game. They, for some reason, add way too much unnecessary clutter to this game that was simple and worked perfectly fine on its own. And yet, here is Final Fantasy VII Remake, a game that just needed to just follow the original story and it would have been fine, but was added in with unnecessary clutter. Cloud and Zack have this relationship similar to Sora and Roxas. Kingdom Hearts games are style over substance, and classic Final Fantasy games have a lot of substance to them. And now here's Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I truly believe it's more about style over substance. I don't think this game has any interesting message to say besides, hey, look at this. You think this is neat? And for that reason, I don't really care. I mean, I've been actually upset about this all day. At work, I've been messing things up because I was thinking about Final Fantasy and how much it's upsetting me. By talking about it and letting time go, yeah, I'm getting over it. I don't really care. It's just a game, and the original will still always exist. But I'm so tired of Square Enix perverting this franchise. Enough time has passed after Advent Children and Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus and those weird mobile games that no one's ever played, and all the little anime movie they made, and all this other weird random Final Fantasy VII shit. And some good has come out of it. Final Fantasy Dissidia is a really good series. Not really the PS4 game, but the PSP games. They tell really good, faithful stories and have really cool, really detailed versions of these characters that are very fitting for the original games. Not only that, but Cloud has appeared in Super Smash Bros., and there's a running joke that Super Smash Bros. Manages to handle characters better than the original companies. See example Mega Man and Simon Belmont. Cloud fits the mold perfectly. He fights exactly how he should based off his original game. And that's the thing. All of this content will always be based off the original game. Nothing will ever replace the original game. And I think because they're doing its own thing and trying to be so radically different, it'll force people who care about this game, care about the remake, for example, it'll force them to go back and play the original. Because you can't really understand the original just by playing the remake. And in fact, the remake spoils things that happen in the original much earlier on and without context, almost ruining the execution of these original, plot twists and reveals. So really, you shouldn't even play this game unless you've beaten the original already. You shouldn't even play this game until you know the story. And so maybe people can play this game, get really fucking confused, and then realize, okay, they're not even going to do the original game. I guess I should just go back and play the original game so I can enjoy the remake to its full extent. And if that's the case, then I'm not that upset. Square Enix has made the original Final Fantasy VII very easy to get and very easy to play. The new versions of Final Fantasy VII Original have features that speed up the time, so that way the game runs way faster. It also has features that let you turn off random encounters, so you don't have to battle people if you're just trying to go to the next area. It also has a feature where you can't take any damage in a battle, and basically makes it so you can't lose. I don't think this affects the game's achievements at all either. If you just want to experience the story, you can experience the entire story without even playing the game. If you want to challenge yourself and get through the game and then you get to a point where it's too hard, you can make it a little bit easier. Say, for example, you ran out of potions and you have no MP and you can't heal your team or something because you don't know how to manage your items because this is your first RPG and it's a little too hard for you. I think it's almost impossible, but let's say you're really young or you really are just not good at RPGs. This new version of Final Fantasy VII, I'm not talking about the remake, I'm talking about the HD version, really lets you get away with a lot of bullshit that makes it a lot easier to get through. Now, I think Final Fantasy VII is already a great intro point for people who are not very good at turn-based games or have never really played them before, and they're a little older now, they're not kids, therefore they're not really willing to put up with bullshit, and they're a little too afraid to try a game like Final Fantasy VII. The new versions on PS4 and Switch and Xbox One and Steam will have your back. And not only that, as I just mentioned, they're on almost every system. If you only have a Switch, yeah, go ahead. Play Final Fantasy VII on the go. Last time I beat Final Fantasy VII, I was playing the PS1 version on my Vita, which meant I had to play the game legit. But I got to play it on my Vita, which meant I had a really nice screen to play on, and I could just play it wherever I was, and I would just chill on my couch and watch TV at the same time while playing it, which is what I did, and I had a blast doing it. You can do that with the Switch version. You can also just play it on your PC if you're a huge PC gamer, or whatever console you have it on, you will have the option to play Final Fantasy VII. I really recommend everyone checks out the original version, especially if you're interested in this game at all, but it's also just an experience that, you know, if you care about gaming, you should at least give it a shot. It's a fun game, and if you don't want to play it, maybe just watch a Let's Player play it. I mean, there's got to be some videos out there. I know Markiplier is not going to go out and beat the original Final Fantasy VII, but someone should, because it's worth it. It's a great game. It's just a long game. And that's not bad, because for me, I feel like I got through it pretty fast. I think I beat it in like a week, and that was with working a job. I had a lot of fun, and it's a great game. In conclusion, what are my final thoughts on this game? The remake, not the original. Well, it was a fun journey. I don't regret it. I don't regret paying for it. And hell, I'm probably going to keep playing it. I might play it a little bit more because the combat's very satisfying and I'm not really done with it yet. I'm having fun. But do I think it's really that great? Do I think it's a masterpiece? And do I think it replaces the original? Absolutely not. There's no way in no world can you play this game unless you've also played the original. If you play this game and you haven't played the original yet, you're just ruining the original for yourself, but also you're not even getting the full treatment of this game. You're ruining this game for yourself. They go hand in hand, and you have to have experienced both to get the full satisfaction of the remake. So, what do I think? I don't know, man. It's not really a remake, and it's not really what I wanted. It's got really stupid plot points, and it's really fucking got horrible pacing that makes it a chore to get through. I don't really want to rebeat the whole game ever again, which does not say very good things about it, because I've rebeaten the original Final Fantasy VII many times because it's such a blast to get through. So, what do I rate this game? If I had to give it a number score out of 10, I'm not giving it an 8 just because I think the gameplay is good. The pacing is horrible. The story is horrible. So it's kind of bad. But the gameplay has got so much fun things about it that it still works. It's just a shame you can't really enjoy that gameplay because the pacing is just so bogged down. The episodic nature of this game has ruined it, and the fact that it's a remake has ruined it. I can't give this game anything higher than a 7, but because it does the emotional plot points of the original game so well, and the combat's so much fun, I can still say it's about a 7 out of 10. Yeah, it's above mediocre. Great. The original Final Fantasy VII is a fucking masterpiece, 10 out of 10. I fucking stand by that forever. It's a fantastic game. You can be a contrarian and call it overrated all you want. Of course, a game that is really fucking good is going to be overrated. It's massively popular. It's massively popular because it's so fucking good. Of course it's popular. It's not the best Final Fantasy. It's not even the best RPG. But it's a fantastic first introduction to RPGs that still holds up for fans who are hardcore of RPGs. I love that game. And I love the characters. I love playing as Cloud in Smash. I love playing as Cloud in Final Fantasy Tactics and all the other stupid fucking games he's in. I love that Cloud's in Kingdom Hearts. And so yeah, I do have a high standard, and I don't think it's a good thing that Final Fantasy VII Remake is just above mediocre, but hey man, if you are interested in this game, above mediocre is pretty good. And that's what I have to say about this game. It could have been a lot better, but Square Enix fucked it up by being Square Enix. I told my friend to make a thumbnail for this video, and I told him that if he's going to add any personal flair to the thumbnail, don't make it too happy, because I'm going to be kind of negative in this review. He made the picture a dumpster fire, and I don't really think this game is a dumpster fire. However, if it's attempting to be a remake, it has failed in every way. As a replacement for Final Fantasy VII, this game gets like a 2 out of 10. It's fucking trash at that. And in that sense, it is a fucking dumpster fire, because the story's a goddamn mess. Well, this has been like my first real full-on review of a game where I've tried to edit and put in a lot of cool stuff and make it really satisfying to watch, and not just be rambling over a picture. It's very fitting because I love Final Fantasy VII so much, and this remake has affected me in a big way. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't really have much else to add. You can watch my recorded stream of the game where I played it blind, and you can see my reactions as they happen, and see me get upset and grumpy a lot. I don't recommend it because it's like, 30 hours of content. But if you want to watch bits and pieces, be my guest. But that being said, that's my review of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys on the next one.